Welcome, everyone, to the sixth in our series of virtual speaker events. I'm Nancy Shepard, First Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto. In addition to our own league members joining us today, we've invited our sister leagues, schools and universities in the South Bay, religious and community organizations, as well as BridgeUSA chapters in our local high schools and colleges. For today's event, we are fortunate to have participation from our league's youth vote team. We are thrilled that more and more high school students are stepping up to the active participation in our league and our nation's democracy. Ella Holsinger, a junior at Castellea School, is with us today to introduce Manu Meel, our guest speaker. Ella is a member of Castellea's BridgeUSA chapter. She works on the league's youth vote team, and during her summer internship with our league, she produced and narrated voter education videos, which can be found on our website. She joined the league to increase youth voter education and registration in Palo Alto and publicize the importance of voting among her peers. As this is a webinar format, attendees will be muted throughout. We encourage you to use chat function during the presentation to enter your questions, as we have allowed plenty of time for Q&A. Also, for those interested in having live closed caption, please turn this on down at the bottom of your screen where you see the CC and the live transcript. Okay, and now please let me introduce Ella Holsinger. Ella?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Nancy, for introducing me, and thanks to the League for providing me this opportunity to welcome our guest speaker and moderator for today's webinar. Our guest this evening, Manu Meel, will be speaking about improving democracy one conversation at a time, how young people are fighting for better politics. Manu is an emerging social entrepreneur and the co-founder and CEO of BridgeUSA, an organization that strives to inspire productive political dialogue and ideological diversity. Manu works to cultivate respectful and empowering discourse in high school and college campuses, as he believes young people are the solution to the severe polarization the United States is presently facing. He created BridgeUSA to provide an escape from the partisan politics of today and to inspire common understanding between peers with different perspectives and positionalities. Moderating our webinar is Emily Garcia, the National Director of Youth Development at BridgeUSA, where she aims to inspire high schoolers to participate in BridgeUSA's mission of engaging in solution-oriented politics before starting college. Emily is currently a student at Arizona State University studying politics in the economy and is the president of the university's BridgeUSA chapter. As Nancy mentioned, we encourage you to use the chat function to enter your questions throughout the webinar, and Emily will get to as many as possible. And now, please join me in a warm welcome to our panelists, Manu and Emily.
Ella, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. Emily, please feel free to say hi too. I realize I cut you off.
Yeah, thank you, Ella, for that warm introduction. I'm excited to moderate this conversation. And please utilize the chat function to ask any and all questions. We want to be as open as possible and make this as fruitful of a discussion as it can be.
And so the way that we're going to do this conversation, when Myra first asked me to host and do the speaker series in the League of Women Voters, the first thing I told her was I highlighted the word emerging in my biography that Ella also highlighted here. So I thank all of you for taking 1 hour out of your evening to listen to an emerging perspective on democracy. And then the second piece of this is that the way we've structured this is I'm going to talk for about 5 minutes max, and then Emily is going to engage us in a moderated conversation. And then we're going to go to your Q&As, because as a recent college graduate, I just came out of college and I know exactly what it feels like to sit through a Zoom lecture. And so please feel free to make this as interactive, as engaging, and as constructive as possible. So I want to highlight and read to you the mission of the league. And I'm not going to tell you about BridgeUSA or what I do right now. That's what Emily's going to get into. I want to get and talk a little bit about my perspective on democracy and what I think it actually means to break down the phrase, improving democracy one conversation at a time. Because when you first hear that phrase, it sounds pretty abstract and a little hokey pokey. Improve democracy one conversation at a time. How does that work? So I'm going to define and break down some phrases, but first I want to read the League of Women Voters and your statement, which is, we envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. So I'm going to let that hang there for a quick second. Now, the title of the talk is Improving Democracy One Conversation at a Time. So first, what do we mean by democracy? I think right now we're at a point in our country where most people don't actually agree or understand what it means to be living in a democracy and the value of a democracy. Here's what democracy means to me. Democracy consists of institutions. Those are the laws, those are the functions that govern not only society, but provide people the opportunity to exercise their voice. And the second piece, which is actually, I think, a far underrated piece of democracy, is the people in democracy. Democracy consists of institutions and people. And my job and Emily's job and what Ella is doing at high school is to make people more empathetic, more constructive, or more engaged in our democracy. Because if you have bad institutions, you can have the best citizenry on the planet, but they have no way to exercise their voice. And if you have amazing institutions, but the people don't trust each other, there's discord, there's division, there's hatred, there's anger, you can have the most amazing institutions, but the actual democracy struggles. And so when it comes to the next part of the phrase, which is improving, the League statement, I think, is absolutely accurate here. And I want to add a couple of things to it. I think there's three things that we need for our democracy to be more effective, especially to meet the challenges of the next generation, to reconcile with where we are headed in the 21st century. First is that democracy is about people. Every conversation right now in our political narrative and our dialogue is focused on how we make our institutions better, how we determine which laws to implement, how we ensure that people have the access to the ballot. But none of that actually entails basic questions that people have right now. What does it mean to live in the United States? What does it mean to be a citizen? What does trust mean? Why do Republicans believe what they believe? Why do Democrats believe what they believe? So I think the first part of Bridge is to help people be more effective. If you were to distill my work in one sentence, it's an investment in people. It's a way to help people reconcile the humanity within each other and to recognize that there's so much common pain in this country, and we need to find the common purpose to solve that common pain. The second part is that our vote matters. It's not enough for people to just talk to each other. It's also important for people to go to the ballot box. And right now we have a situation in our country where, whether we think it's factual or not, people feel that their voice is not representative in our democracy. And regardless of whether or not we believe that there's voter suppression or there's voting rights issues, or that we have the best voting rights in the country or the worst voting rights in the country, the fact is that people feel that way. A lot of people in this country feel disenfranchised. And so we have to figure out how to make sure that they believe that when they act and participate in democracy, they can make a positive impact. Because democracy is only as good as what people put into it. It rests on action. And the final part is that we have to demonstrate that democracy actually solves and delivers for people in our society. I think for the first time in the last 80 years, since World War II and the rise of what we call the New World Order, we are actually questioning the efficacy of democracies compared to authoritarian models of government. And what we have to recognize is that when it comes to our politics, people across the world are wondering whether or not democracies can actually hold up and address things like the racial discord in our society, or the technological challenges, or whether or not China has a better approach. So democracy has to deliver. So your question now is, how do you improve and deliver all of that with one conversation at a time? And what I'm here to tell you is that the power of individual action is not only understated, but it has been the engine for progress in the past. The shirt that Louise was wearing before she went off camera was "Democracy is not a spectator sport," or I think it might have been Nancy. Democracy is not a spectator sport. You can vote people into office. You can show up at the ballot box every 4 years. But if we don't actually understand and feel that the neighbor that lives next to us belongs in the same country that we belong in, if we don't feel that the person that disagrees with me has real valid experiences, you cannot address and deliver on any of the problems that exist today because we need consensus. We live in a democracy. Not one party can shove down their legislation, then we go back seesaw 4 or 5 years. It's not only a bonker system to invest in, but at the same time, it prevents and undermines the ability for other countries to believe that our society works. So that's what I would end with, is one conversation at a time. The idea behind that is don't underestimate the power of your individual action, especially if you're a young person. And that's the last thing I'm going to end on, and then I'm going to flip it over to Emily because I know she's got some questions. Why do young people matter in this conversation? Why is it that the league has taken a risk on an emerging leader and Ella and Emily and myself? We're basically a ragtag group of people that are trying to not only facilitate dialogue, but face it, we're trying to be vulnerable in the face of a political system that doesn't reward vulnerability. 2 reasons why young people are important. First is that young people are going to inhibit and not only engender a culture of inclusivity, but they're going to actually inhabit our systems of government. They're going to be the ones that take over. That's not only a demographic and generational fact, but it's a fact of life. So the thing is, if we want our democracy to sustain 20, 30, 40 years down the road, we have to make sure that our next generation is equipped and ready to answer the call. But the second point, and this is a point of slight pessimism, it will be the only point of pessimism in this talk, but we have to get the point of pessimism out of the way. That is that if you look at a young person my age, I'm 22, there's 4 major events that define the lived history of most people my age. It's 9/11, the Great Recession, the 2016 election, and the year that is 2020, the pandemic, the Capitol riots, the racial protests. Those are 4 pretty massive institutional failures. So take a step back. Most people my age don't know a democracy where institutions are delivering for them, let alone preventing conflict from arising. What that means is that most people my age are either really apathetic about the political process, or they're really skeptical about institutions, or the only form of engagement they embody is very extreme in their ideology, because the only thing they see in our political atmosphere is vitriolic partisan rhetoric that drives votes and profit. So given that mindset, we have to approach this conversation with how do we demonstrate that our democracy not only works for these young people, but that when they act, when they get involved, change happens, progress happens. And I don't mean change and progress in a liberal progressive manner. I mean change and progress in a human way. Just the fact that we all belong in a society that rewards our basic actions. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily.
Thank you, Manu. And I think this segues perfectly into our questions that we have prepared. So without further ado, I'm sure everyone in the audience is burning to know this answer, and you kind of tiptoed around it, but let's just get to it. What is BridgeUSA? And more specifically, what are we trying to accomplish?
That's a great question, because I'm sure people are trying to figure out, what does this guy actually do? So when it comes to what we're working on, BridgeUSA is the largest movement of students in the country trying to remove and we revive our civic fabric so that we live in a stronger democracy. We're the largest movement of young people that are trying to bring the country together. What that actually means is in 2017, me and a group of people that didn't know each other at that time got together and we built a space on campus. I'm not going to tell the story yet because I think it might be in a later question. We built a space on campus where young people were engaged in listening to each other. It's not a novel concept. We built a space where people could come to campus and know that Bridge chapters are the place to be, where they can hear ideologically diverse opinions and get their views and perspectives challenged, not necessarily to change their ideas, but to arrive at a point of better understanding. That notion in space, this idea of a warm, fuzzy place on campus where you can talk to each other, appealed to a lot of people. And so what we did was we took that first chapter, and then we took a second chapter, and we took a third chapter. And what we did was we suddenly had college chapters across the country that are focused on 3 things: facilitating civic dialogue between young people, helping to affect and implement university policy that actually rewards inclusive dialogue, ideological diversity, free and civil discussion. And the third thing is engage policymakers, not so that they can sell certain ideas or policy platforms, because they do that all over the place. But when they come to a bridge discussions, to actually expose and be exposed to challenge, to facilitate a conversation. So ultimately, when you think about BridgeUSA, it is a group of young people from across the political spectrum that are not focused on ideology. We're all across the political spectrum. Emily and I disagree on a lot of things. I don't even know Ella's beliefs, but I can guarantee that we disagree on a lot too, no matter which party we're from. But we're focused on temperament. How are you actually engaging? How are you expressing? That's the movement that we're building, is a movement that's supposed to last to solidify the foundation of this country and to make sure that everyday people have the skills they need to have tough and difficult conversations.
So going all the way back, before there was that creation of a warm, fuzzy space on campus, what was the inspiration? What is the backstory? What was the initial catalyst that drove you to create that space on campus?
By the way, I should be honest. It was warm and fuzzy only from like June to September, because Berkeley rains a lot and it gets really cold. So it was really cold for the rest of the year. But the conversations are super warm. I normally, if this was a Zoom call, I'd ask people, but I can't see anyone. How many of you remember the 2017 free speech protests at UC Berkeley? That's where I went to school. I'm going to assume that some people do, because this is a Bay Area audience. So in 2017, I was a freshman. I had no interest in politics. I still don't have any interest in politics, believe it or not. I was a pre-med student. And second semester, the college Republicans decided that they would invite this speaker by the name of Milo Yiannopoulos. For those of you that don't know, Milo, not my character, he's just a right-wing provocateur. That's his sort of shtick. And so he showed up on campus, and I remember I was walking by and there were helicopters flying over, and I could hear screaming and shouting in the distance. And suddenly I walked through this coffee shop whose window had been broken in and smashed. And on TV, there was a CNN playing, and it had the banner that said UC Berkeley students protesting Breitbart speakers' free speech. And the CNN crew that was filming that was standing right next to me, filming it. It was the most surreal collision of real life politics and this notion that democracy is all around you. You can't insulate yourself from political conversations and dialogues. I walked down campus and you could see a massive throng of people that not only set the campus tree on fire, but there was just so much hate and animosity. And it honestly, by the end of the night, it had nothing to do with the speaker's speech. It had everything to do with three things. And it's what I talked about earlier: pessimism, apathy, and a deep distrust in institutions. So the next day, a bunch of people were collected on Sproul Plaza. And what we did was, hey, what can we do about this? In our classic opportunistic freshman selves, we were like, let's build an organization. So what we did was, me and a couple of random people got together and we created that space. That space caught on. Still no idea of Bridge. Coincidentally, there are folks at Notre Dame, folks at CU Boulder that built other spaces called Bridge ND, Bridge Boulder. We were called Bridge Berkeley. All a coincidence. You feel me? It's because the notion of bridge was a very visceral idea that students wanted but wasn't there. And that's what kicked off our story.
Great. It's always cool to hear the backstories of how organizations came to be, because there always is a defining moment that led to the creation of something, creation of movements. So this question, I'm not only going to ask Manu Meel, I'm also going to ask Ella. So Ella, I'll actually pose it to you first. Why is it important for young people to be involved? And more specifically, why do you feel like you wanted to be involved?
Well, I think there are two important things that I want to mention. The first is what Manu said. We will inhibit these governmental systems soon. And if we learn to compromise and learn to understand others' perspectives, when we inhibit these systems, we'll better understand each other, and we'll hopefully better work on ourselves and work on working as a whole, so we can be a little bit more productive. I think also democracy is not just voting. As a young person, I cannot vote yet, but there's so much more to do. Like, activism is such an important role in our democracy right now. And I feel like that is such an important thing that young people can even lead. Like, there have been so many movements in our history that have been led by young people and that have had such great outcomes and have really bettered our country. And for me, I really was interested in getting involved because I feel like there is so much to work on. So I feel like starting from a young age was good, because I had more time. I had more time to learn. I learned from a young age, which is just a great time to more better understand my peers and to really instill those skills at a young age.
And I would just say, I think Ella said it perfectly. And to Chris's comment, I think inherit is the right word there. I would just say that, and Ella, please feel free to jump in whenever. I think to your point about inheriting institutions, when it comes to how students and youth look at politics, this isn't just a young people are going to save the day situation. One thing that I tell everyone else in my generation is, just because everyone else thinks that Gen Z is coming, they're going to save the day, means we're going to save the day. There's no unique reason why we're any better than older generations or any worse than older generations. We're just a generation that's coming up. We're going to inherit some crises, and we're going to have to figure out what we do with it. Which is why I think it's not a question of youth as being, and as Robert F. Kennedy once said this, and he was very eloquent, was that youth is not a time of life, but it's a state of mind. You could be really young and act in a really old way, and you could be really old and act in a very young way. The fact that the league has young people involved in this conversation demonstrates the youthfulness of the league. It's this notion that we have to constantly keep adapting our systems. So I think Ella's absolutely right. And I would just ask Emily, because I'm always curious, and one thing hopefully the audience realizes about Bridge is it's really not about me or Emily or Ella, it's about the young people. That's why I want to realize that in this conversation. So I guess, Emily, I would ask you as the chapter of the Arizona State, as the president of the Arizona State chapter, how do you stay hopeful and stay engaged, given how crazy the political situation is, not only in college campuses, but especially in a state like Arizona?
Especially in a state like Arizona in more recent times, having Senator Kyrsten Sinema even encountering some turmoil while she was teaching at ASU's campus. And then we had another incident where our campus was going viral again. So if you're unsure about that, you can Google that. I won't get too much into the nitty-gritty of that. But I would say one of the things that keeps me hopeful is understanding that the work that we do and the work and the hours that we put in day to day, we probably won't see the fruits of our labor till years to come. And one, that can be really daunting at times because you don't have this instant gratification. You don't have this instant reward of seeing what's going on. But what I always tell people is that we're planting seeds that eventually we will see a whole forest grow from. So eventually we will see a whole generation made of leaders who can have difficult conversations with people who they disagree with, can respond to people that with empathy and trying to gain a better understanding rather than shutting them off and ignoring their concerns or their opinions. So that's what always keeps me moving, is looking around my organization, seeing how it's grown in the past 4 years from just 4 of some of my closest friends sitting around a table, creating questions about abortion and having that as their first discussion, to now we operate an organization that has roughly about 40 to 50 students attend. We just hosted our annual event, Bridge the Gap, where we had 110 students come and participate, having these dialogues with political organizations on campus, with other professors. So I always remind myself that right now, I might not see my friends and my peers in these positions or making this direct impact, but I do see it when they're having these conversations and they have these moments where they're like, oh, I never thought about it that way. Thank you for challenging my perspective. Or they leave going, wow, I have a better understanding of who that person is, more so than just what their policy stance is. So you have those pings of hope and you have to cling on to those. And then I think the biggest hope that I have in our work is understanding that eventually these students will be in positions of leadership or will be part of, whether it's organizations, corporations, politics, anything like that. They're going to be able to engage in productive conversations in a way that will make them stand out among their peers. And I hope that that will just create a movement of people who want to have empathetic conversations with each other.
No, I think that's very interesting. And I think especially when it comes to, empathetic conversations and dialogue, one of the biggest criticisms that I often hear and I know we're totally going off script, but I think the conversation is valuable. So please steer us back to the next question after this comment. But when you think about what you just said, people will say, well, that's really kumbaya because we got real world problems and they're right at our doorstep. Well, I'm here to tell you that whether it is we care about climate change, criminal justice, democracy reform, you name the issue, economic immobility, you currently have a system of governance where one party controls all three institutions and you still can't get it done. That tells you something, and that is that it's not a question of legislative inaction. It's the fact that our citizenry is not healthy. We're just not a healthy citizenry. Our democracy is back to basics, which means it demands basic solutions. And one of the most basic solutions and facts of democracy, and especially if you're joining now, one thing I said in the beginning is core of our democracy is people. So we got to do the best to make our people more better. We have to heal our society. That's the position that we're at. Emily, I see some questions in the chat as well, but.
Yes, and we will get to those. I am noting them. Thank you for asking your questions, and please continue to do so. We will have plenty of time to go over them. So Manu, I think one of the most interesting questions that we have, and we'll do this and then another one before we move on to the Q&A, but what is your favorite bridge moment or story?
My favorite bridge moment is honestly at a very micro scale. And it comes to the point of like, where do you get hope? For me, the work is most important when I see two people come to a conversation and they came to that conversation with zero hope of it going anywhere and of 100% of anger towards the other person. They leave the conversation not with their minds changed, but with better understanding for that person's experiences. So a really good example of this was I think this was in 2019. We were at our UC Berkeley chapter. So this was like after we were about 10 chapters in as an organization. And we had this conversation on immigration. And we invited, and this is an important fact about Bridge Dialogues, we try to make it so that it's not just the moderate people that are coming to these conversations, it's your actual students that are affected by those issues. Because we don't want to just create an ideological bubble of bridgers. So we had the DACA students come, the students that have a status that's not necessarily citizenship, but it allows them to stay in the country given their residence. And then we had your like Trump voting anti-immigrant students show up to this discussion. And we obviously consulted with both of them to make sure that they were all right. And we started this conversation and this young lady gets up and she starts talking about her experience being born in the country and being raised in this country, not knowing any other country. And then suddenly one of the students puts on their like red MAGA hat in like an act of defiance. And we're like, oh no, like here goes the problem. Get out your phones. This is like the social media moment that everyone criticizes Bridge for. And believe it or not, it wasn't that woman had so much patience because she explained to him her story more. And then he talked about how his family was from like the El Paso region of Texas. And he was scared and his family was scared of violence and illegal folks running through their farms, believe it or not. It's stories that you never hear before. And so the conclusion of that conversation was not that like suddenly this person was like, let's have all the DACA people in the country, or the DACA student convinced and was like, I need to leave this country. It was that they both realized how much common pain there is. There's so much common pain. The student wanted to stay in this country because that's the only thing she knew. And the young Trump student had just a lot of anxiety. So the way to resolve that is not to be punitive and label the Trump student as xenophobic or to label the DACA student as an illegal alien. It's to recognize that pain and then utilize that pain to solve the common issues that are there. Because otherwise, we're not getting anywhere. And that was an amazing moment for me.
Thank you for sharing that story, Manu. It's always cool to see how through these conversations, people can gain just a better understanding of each other. It's not about reaching a conclusion.
And Emily, I would just say the event that you were just talking about, the Bridge the Gap event, for y'all that don't know, that event was so successful that at the end, actually, this was another interesting story. Really quickly, the student comes up to me after the event. He's got this like big Dallas Cowboys jersey on. His name is Jesus. And he starts talking to me. He's like, how do I join this organization? And I was like, well, the president is over there, Emily Garcia. She's the president of the chapter. You got to go talk to her. And he was like, great, because I'm part of the Young Democrats and they suck. And I want to join this organization. And again, it just gets this deep distrust, not only the institutions, but just a desire to break our current malaise that we're in. So sorry, I'll flip it back to you.
No, it's okay. I am actually going to pass it off to Ella. She's going to ask the first live Q&A question of today's session, and then we'll go back into some questions that were asked by email before the event started. And then after that, we will transition back into the live Q&A questions. So please keep the questions coming. The more the merrier. We're happy to answer practically anything that you want to know about BridgeUSA.
Great, thank you. Well, I think one question I had for Manu was, what type of challenges did you have to overcome when starting BridgeUSA? And could you give us an example by any chance?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting line that actually Steve Jobs said in the commencement address at Stanford, which was that you can't connect the dots looking forward, but when you look backwards, the dots all connect. And what he meant by that is that when we were first starting Bridge, it had nothing to do with Bridge for me. It had to do with fixing a real problem on my campus, which was that my friends hated each other. That's what got me going. And so if I were to look at and say, okay, I'm starting this right now, and this is where I'll be in 5 years, is talking to the League of Women Voters about our work. And we're at 50 college campuses, and we're building this organization and this institution. Those are two different things on two different planets. And when you look at a problem in that way, it's nearly impossible to solve. So the biggest challenge for us was taking one step at a time. It's recognizing that this is not, when you look at the distance you have to run, there's no way you're going to make it. But when you look down, you take one step forward, that's how you make it. And for us, we experienced so much challenge. The first semester, people, and I'll be honest, the first critique we ever got was, you guys just want to have far right Nazi folks enter your dialogues. I'm being totally serious with you. And I was like, well, first, have you seen me? I don't look like someone that would support Nazis. But then the second thing was that people have real concerns. There's real challenges about whether or not we want to have these dialogues. There's real questions about, like, if you're a Democrat and you're like, I just can't deal with a Republican person right now. If you're a Republican, you're like, these Democrats are taking over our institutions. I just can't deal with it. That's the biggest challenge we face beyond just organizational work, is a lack of possibility and hope. The best way to fix that is to show people that these conversations are not only possible, but they're life-filling. When I tell you about having a conversation with someone that you disagree with, it doesn't sound that exciting. I don't want to have that conversation. So the biggest challenge is to show that those conversations can happen at scale and that you're fully capable of having that conversation.
Awesome. So transitioning to, great question, Ella. Thank you for asking it. And our first live question is going to be from Marie Claire. Thank you, Marie, for submitting a question. So her question is, us older folks who were active in the 60s and 70s cannot understand why young people don't vote. Your comments about the pessimism, apathy, and distrust of institutions is very illuminating. Can you say more about it and expand on the impact of the 4 events shaping young people's lives, 9/11, Great Recession, etc.? And what can we do to bridge today's generation gap in terms of political activism and to work to encourage young people to vote? Thanks.
That's a great question. I actually, coincidentally, Marie Claire, I got an email yesterday from someone that was leading one of the free speech movements at Berkeley in the 60s at the Free Speech Movement Cafe. And he sent me this long email where he made a very similar point to you. But one of the things that he said was that at the time, he read this article 4 days before Martin Luther King died, and Martin Luther King passed away. And 4 days before that, he wrote the line which said that the moral arc of the universe will always bend towards justice. But the email's tone was, us people that were born in the 60s and 70s can be incredibly proud of the social progress we achieved then in the movements. But when you forward 60 years down the line, it looks like the world is in just as much of a tough predicament and a difficult situation. And so when it comes to your question about political activism and why aren't people voting, I think it really comes to both a belief that when you put into a system that it's not going to return anything for you, that when you vote, nothing is going to really change, that we're going to be in this constant seesaw. Every 4 years, you have a president, then you have a next president, and then maybe you have the previous president running maybe in the next election, which might be happening, and you're just in this political conversation that doesn't seem to be shifting, and as a result, you feel very disempowered. And I think the second reason is that when you've only seen institutions appear to be working for themselves, where parties seem to be in the business of solely preserving themselves. There's this famous line that says that organizations grow to a point where they only exist to preserve the organization, not to actually serve the function of and the mission of that organization. That's a place that we are at right now, where the political parties are in a total act of self-preservation. Given all of that, I still don't excuse young people. And I think the frustration in your question is absolutely right. I think people need perspective. I think people need so much perspective in this country. I come from India. We work in Bridge Africa. Our center is in Nairobi. The work that they're doing right now in Nairobi has nothing to do with dialogues and conversations. It has to do with preventing actual violent conflict during their elections. Until a right is taken away from you, you don't recognize the power and privilege of the right. And I think that's part of the problem. And I think this will naturally swing back. I think as people realize how delicate democracy is, they're going to get a lot more involved. When you start losing your money, you get a lot more protective of it. And that's exactly what's going to happen when it comes to our democracy.
Yes. Okay, and now moving on to Chris's question. Do you have guidelines, formats, and starter questions?
I think Emily's actually far more the expert on this, given that she leads our high school fellowship and trainings. Emily, I want to butt this question over to you. Do you want to talk about the 4 discussion norms that we have in our dialogues?
Yes, I can. I would be more than happy to answer this question. So, Chris, kind of how our meetings work and how we operate is that we always start off with just giving these 4 norms of discussion. So the first one is listen to listen rather than to respond. So encouraging students to actively listen to what their peers are saying. So not just sitting back and already thinking about their rebuttals or what they're already saying. The second one is try not to interrupt or have side conversations. Another caveat that I add to this is try not to look at your phone while someone else is talking. This is a very baseline rule, but you would be surprised how much I have to enforce it as a moderator, because people, they get really impassioned and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, I totally just started talking over him or that person. And then B, they get a notification and somebody will be in the middle of answering their question and they immediately look down at their phone. So when both of those instances happen, they can kind of derail the conversation because it leads to the other person feeling disrespected. The third norm is that participants represent themselves and are not representatives of the social groups or their identities that they belong to and identify with. So this one's a little bit more convoluted, but essentially what it means is that I do not have the authority to speak on behalf of all women. So I cannot make a blanket statement saying, well, all women believe this, or all women experience this. What I can say is that as a woman, this is my experience with this topic or how that's impacted my life. It goes 2 ways also of saying that someone then can't ask me, what do all women think about this? Or you're a woman, so what's your opinion on this? That would be unfair. And then the fourth one, and you're going to have to forgive me, I always forget one of them. So let me just jog my memory. Or Manu, you want to phone a friend here?
I'm gonna phone a friend and just say that Emily's excused, given that she just came out of a midterm today. And so I would just say that the last discussion and norm is that you have to be respectful in your conversations and recognize the experience that the other person brings to the table. That's not the exact norm, but the actual substance of that just means that the power of vulnerability is totally understated in conversations and dialogue. It goes to a point that you were just asking, Chris, in your question, which is, what is a conversation starter? It is actually talk about your story, your background. We live in a world, unfortunately, that no matter how rational we think we are, neurologically, we react a lot more to emotion. We react to experience. We react to affect. If I can relate to you as a human, I'm more likely to believe you in your position, let's say, on vaccines. So that's the last norm, is bring your personal experience into the conversation, but your personal experience does not represent all Indian Americans. That's how I would just wrap that up. Mm-hmm. Emily, what other questions we got? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and for formats and starter questions, we always start off with a brief history of the topic. We try to remain as unbiased as possible. We get information from both sides of the aisle. We utilize allsides.org a lot to make sure that we're maintaining that fine line of trying to present unbiased information. And then starter questions, we do create open-ended questions to facilitate discussion. They go through an intense vetting process that goes through multiple opinions. We even have professors give their takes on questions that we write as well. So the third question is from Michael. Are you interested in engaging with other bridge building organizations like Crossing Party Lines or Braver Angels? I'm on a core team of Silicon Valley Braver Angels Alliance.
Absolutely. It's a great question because one organization can't fix this. We have to, especially in the bridging movement, work together. This is a massive puzzle, and we only represent one small puzzle piece in the broader solution that's needed to address this problem. The problem's systemic. You have to have a system of organizations working together. Direct answer to your question, we work very closely with Braver Angels. Emily's hosted a couple of Braver Angels debates, and the partnership that we have with an organization like Braver Angels is that we essentially represent the doorway and gateway to college campuses and now high schools, as Ella is on the Cassidy campus. So when it comes to these organizations, there's direct engagement, direct dialogue, and importantly, collaboration is super important in the nonprofit space, especially when you want to address the problem of something like polarization. The last note that I would just say is that the reason why an organization like Braver Angels and Bridge work hand in hand is because Braver Angels is addressing older generations, and we're focused on high school and college students. And together, what you have is this amazing intergenerational synergy. And again, remember, youth is not a time of life, it's a state of mind. So this is not just a young people are going to save the day thing. We have to learn from the older generations and their mistakes, and we hope to contribute the same to the table in the conversation.
So our next question was submitted through email from Jen. Can you tell us how you were selected to lead the bridge building pillar of the recently launched nonpartisan initiative, Partnership for American Democracy, otherwise known as PFAD? How is this initiative taking root?
Well, first I want to thank Jen. Jen has been an amazing supporter of our work, and importantly, she's been a personal mentor of mine when it comes to fundraising. So Jen, thank you so much, and shout out to you. Partnership for American Democracy, I'll stay very brief because it's a question that's very specific. Partnership for American Democracy is a national initiative of political leaders, ex-secretaries of state, reporters, all focused on trying to figure out how do we restore the strength of our democracy. And there's 4 pillars. Remember, I said democracy was about institutions and citizens. So one of the pillars, bridge building, that's focused on citizens. The other pillar is reforms, focused on institutions. The third pillar is focused on media. And then the final pillar is focused on how we actually bring all these different pillars together in concert. And so the reason why I lead the bridge building pillar along with some amazing co-chairs is because I think that people are rightly recognizing the power that young people hold in the conversation. And also I just say that I oftentimes make a fool of myself and make these conversations that are very serious a lot more light and easier to swallow. But that's the most important thing is I provide and try to bring a voice wherever I can, especially to people that are stuck or feel that they can't move against this monster that is polarization.
Yes, I think that is a perfect segue into our second emailed question from Alice Smith. There are currently nonpartisan reforms outlined in the Freedom to Vote Act, such as open primaries and ranked choice voting. How do we prevent these issues from becoming partisan issues and allow opportunities for both Republicans and Democrats to work on them?
Yeah, again, I'll be short because I know we want to get through some more questions. When it comes to democratic reforms, you think about open primaries, ranked choice voting, other ones like gerrymandering, campaign finance. The problem is that our system, the way it looks right now, is exactly how it's supposed to look. People are playing to their incentives. You ask, why is there so much polarization? Why is there so much big money? It's because that's how the system works. You can't blame people for playing in the rules. And so when it comes to affecting and tinkering with those rules, the moment that tinkering becomes partisan, it becomes partisan because those rules are benefiting someone at that moment in time. So right now, Democrats would argue that gerrymandering, for example, is implemented by Republicans in a lot of different districts to acquire power. In the 80s, the Democrats also gerrymandered a bunch of districts. The reason why gerrymandering appears to be something that is partisan is because the Republicans are more benefiting from it at this moment in time, because our democracy has the memory of an elephant, in the sense that we don't realize that this is not a moment by moment game. This is a long-term game, and it's not a game for power. It's a game for people. So when people's lives are at stake, these reforms cannot be partisan reforms. They're reforms for the health of our citizenry. And I think that's exactly the pitch you have to make. To get everyone involved, you have to make sure that these reforms are perceived as reforms that level the playing field for everyone, that it's not a Democratic power grab and it's not a Republican power grab. It's a power grab for people. And that's a power grab that everyone likes.
Thank you. And question from Marie Claire: what's the best way to combat the disinformation that contributes to us, to so many divisions among us?
So when it comes to a lot of the misinformation, disinformation, misinformation is difficult, because you often think about, right now, a lot of people will say that you have one side that is spreading more misinformation. When it comes to issue by issue, you'll have often both partyism on misinformation. The fact is that the reason why misinformation is such a toxic problem is because it garners a lot of attention, and our information spreads through our social media institutions. And the way to fix that is not necessarily, I think, to censor or stop that information. It's to make sure that the algorithms that people are building to actually show you the content, to show you what's there, is fact-based, and importantly, it's based not as driving division, but it's meant to actually educate and inform. So right now, if I were to put a tweet or a thing that said, Emily's a conspiracy theorist that's leading a bunch of elephants down Arizona State's campus, like, everyone's going to be like, holy shit, that's insane and that's crazy. That's how misinformation spreads. And so the job is, I think, a big part of it involves social media companies. The other part of your question, which is, how does it contribute to just actual division? Again, I think we live in a society, and we as humans respond to affect, to emotion, a lot more than fact. It's why I can't convince my sister to do certain things, is because she cares more about how she feels about me than the fact that I'm trying to present. And the fact is always going to be right for me. So we have to actually bring the level of the conversation to emotions and use facts to touch our emotions. If you believe that vaccines are truly good for people, talk about why you think that will make this person's life better. But don't hit them over the head with 90% effectivity, because that doesn't change their mind yet. It's not going to change their mind in the future. So get to the level of emotion.
Great answer. And then a question from Nancy. The public commons and the common good seem lost in our current conversation and principles of a democratic society. How does BridgeUSA address and promote a better understanding of the common good?
I think that's such a good question, because a common good is only a common good until it's actually starting to be taken away from you. What I mean by that is, you think about democracy. You think about things that we share, like, look at the air. Climate change is a great example. Think about anything that we publicly share. It only becomes super valuable when it starts to disappear and people realize that it's something that is not something to be taken for granted, but is a privilege. When it comes to basic common goods, we have to recognize that our democracy is not only there to serve everyone, but the best way to preserve the space that is our democracy is to make sure that everyone can participate in it, but also that you get an equal return on your participation. Again, the reason why there's declining trust in our democracy is simple. It's because it seems like it's not working. To me, it's not that complicated of a situation. People can't talk to each other, so we can't coexist, and our democracy is not solving problems. Those are the two issues. And so the best way to restore that is to help people realize the power of their individual action in preserving the efficacy and the integrity of our institutions. And I just want to address one last thing about how does BridgeUSA promote a better understanding of the common good? And that is that the most important, I think, phrase in common good is common. And common is shared. The only way that you can value someone else that is sharing something that you're also a part of is when you value them as a person. And what BridgeUSA is doing is it's on its college campuses, it's helping people realize the humanity in each other, the experience in each other. I think the biggest problem that we face when it comes to these conversations is we believe that people that have different opinions than us don't have the valid experiences to back those opinions up. And I think that hubris shows up in our conversations.
So I'm sure everyone in the audience is just burning to know the answer to this question. How can the League of Women Voters help out BridgeUSA or help depolarize these conversations?
It's a very good question, because I think the League of Women Voters is an organization that is historically positioned not only as a response to the ability for people to vote, but it exists to ensure that our democracy is not only effective, but that the people that are participating in the democracy have the confidence to participate. I think the League is a history that demonstrates what I'm about to say does not need to be said. I think you all embody that. That is, first, do your work. I want you all to succeed. We need you all to succeed. The best way that you support us is by doing the best impact that you can when it comes to voter information and voter rights. And importantly, and I know this line is really tough to toe, to do it in a nonpartisan fashion, especially in a place like the Bay Area. It's very difficult. But the moment we buy into the tools that the enemy uses, and the enemy being those that exist to divide us, the moment we allow things that are nonpartisan to become partisan because we think it's more convenient or the situation is very difficult, we lose. So you need to succeed. And that, I think, is the most important thing that you can do to help us. Second is that there are students across the country right now that are having these difficult conversations. And the biggest inhibitor, and this is my first and right use of the term inhibit, as Chris, I think, pointed out earlier in the chat, the biggest inhibitor to their work is not that they're not successful, it's that no one else sees it. I want you to see what these 48 campuses are doing. I want you to see what students in Bridge Africa and Bridge Europe, high school students, community college students are doing to not only understand each other, but to recognize that there's so much more that binds us together. And I think the best way for us to show these conversations are happening at scale is for you to support us. And so if you go to bridgeusa.org, there's a lot of ways to get involved. You go submit the I'm interested form, and that will directly link you to our newsletter where you can read about our work. Please feel free to look into our work. And also, if you so believe that the work needs to be sustained, to support us in a financial manner. Because ultimately, what prevents us from scaling is not the demand for something like Bridge, because remember, it started off in 3 campuses totally spontaneously in Indiana, California, and Colorado. The demand is not what's the problem. It's the support and the resources. And the final point I would just make is to all the parents out there, turn me into the enemy of your children and tell them to join our work. Tell them to talk to me. Tell them to get engaged. If you have a daughter, a granddaughter, son, grandson, brother, sister, they're in college, they're in high school, they're looking for something to do, get them involved. And importantly, tell them that this is not to abandon your Democratic or Republican Party affiliation. Not at all. This is actually, you should be a Democrat. You should be a Republican. Go join the college and high school Democrats, but have BridgeUSA be a part of your political diet, because that's very important. So those are the 3 things I would say. And I'm truly grateful to the League for this opportunity. I'm supposed to turn it over to Myra now, who invited us to come here and help organize this. I'm incredibly grateful. Before I do that, I also want to quickly give Ella a quick chance to say a couple words just about what she thought about the conversation. Importantly, how she thinks she can make the work succeed at her high school, because I also want to hear from you. And then we'll turn it over to Myra.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was just great to hear Manu and Emily. I think that our generation will truly succeed when we have these role models leading us. So it was just so great to hear from y'all. And I think something that I would really like to focus on is just really boiling it down to emotion, just like Manu said, and really touching others with emotion rather than just spitting facts. I think that's really, really a way to make change in our community. So thank you both of you so much for coming.
And Emily, I want to also thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's school night. Thank you for all the work that you do on your campus. And as I always say, I have the easiest job, which is just to talk about our work, but doing it is a lot harder. So I'm grateful to all the work that Emily's doing. Myra, would love to turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Well, I'm all over the moon, thrilled to have been able to join and listen to this incredible conversation. I am passionate about our young people in our country. I feel like you're going to save the planet, save the world. Having these conversations, we are actually trying as a league to have an event in January. We're planning it where we have a sit down table with people from different points of view, different sides from our equal justice team. So we're on the same track. League's mission is you really fulfill that at the young people's perspective. And our youth vote team, part of the League of Women Voters Palo Alto, has grown in the last 3 years. I think when I was first on the team, we had maybe 2 students that participated with us, and I think we're now at 11. As Ella mentioned the other day, I thought we were at 9. It's growing, and our Ella being one of them who created videos this summer as part of our youth vote internship program, created videos which are posted on the League of Women Voters website about voting. So you mirror what we stand for, and you do it in a way generation, but to us of the 60s and 70s generations, I remember those events. I was at University of Wisconsin in the 60s when the war was going on, and there were protests every day, and so I kind of lived through what the Berkeley students have been living through many years. So I just want to say it's just enlightening and very hopeful for me, and I hope for our people that joined today to really hear your point of view and how action oriented you are and bringing people together in conversation. And you're so insightful into how people think and how to move them to action. So I appreciate both having you and Emily and Ella here today, but also for the work you do every day and this amazing organization that you have created to bridge all across the country and the world, as I know I think you have chapters worldwide now. So kudos to you for being the impetus for starting what you started. And I can't wait to see what the future holds, not just for you, but for your entire generation. We appreciate it very, very much. So thank you for that. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being so responsive during the whole planning process for this tonight. I know there are people who wanted to join tonight that registered that probably weren't able to come. This event has been recorded. It will be posted within probably 24 to 48 hours on the League of Women Voters website. You can go to LWVPaloAlto.org. and it will be there in the drop-down tab under events. There's a whole section with all of our speaker series, and if you click on those, you'll see the video available. Also want to give a shout out to she's always there behind the scenes making everything work for us, and my other team members on our events planning committee, Karen Kolinsky and Lisa Vogue-Levin. So thank you, everybody. I wanted to also let you know that we do have an event coming up for our league members in December. That's our virtual winter luncheon. You'll be at home. We weren't quite ready to bring everybody together, but hopefully in 2022 we will. So stay tuned. There will be an announcement in next week's e-blast about that, and it's on December 9th. So if you want to save the date or take a look at that in our next newsletter. And also want to announce that we have an Instagram. And so please follow us on Instagram, post about the event if you were here tonight, and keep spreading the word. And again, thanks everybody. Appreciate all your participation, and till next time.
Myra, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.